Hello everybody, welcome to another Godot code review. This time we're taking a look at the Great Eggscape, which is a basically physics kind of rage-based platformer where you play as an egg that must get to the goal without breaking. This is a 3D game, and I thought it would be interesting for me to take a look at a 3D game given that I don't work in 3D. I have a lot of Godot experience, but not a whole lot of experience with 3D specifically. So it's going to be a good exercise, I think, to take a look at the code, see what's going on under the hood, and see how all of this is working. But before we do that, let's take a look at the gameplay and see what's happening. So we've got a main menu with some music. That seems very nice. We've also got settings here. Let's go ahead and play it. And we start as an egg in a carton in the fridge, and we got to get to the frying pan. So that cinematic, or that little camera cutscene right there, I think we're going to want to take a look at that to see how exactly that's working. Basically what I need to do is I press space and I use the WASD keys to move around. And I have to obviously not splat like that. And we've got fry again, which is pretty funny. But I have to use these environmental objects to cushion my fall. That bucket there is a trampoline of sorts. But I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. So I'm going to be interested to see, first of all, how the cutscene works, and then how the cushioning is actually working when you land on these different objects. Because it seems like I can fall from any height. And as long as I land on an object like this oven mitt here, I'm not going to take any damage. But yeah, if you want to take a look at this game, the itch.io page is linked in the description below. So definitely check that out. Give the developer your support. Before we do anything else, let's go ahead and take a look at what this game scene looks like here. So we've obviously got a 3D scene where there's a bunch of objects. So each of the things that the egg can land on are separate objects. In the case of the waffle, it looks like there's multiple waffles here. The first thing that I'm noticing here is that this is a very large scene, this game scene here. One obvious area of improvement here is this UI canvas layer here. That's great. But what I would do is take this UI canvas layer and save that as a separate scene. I mean, you could just really do this. You could just right click, save branch as scene. We could just save the UI here at the root directory for now, and that collapses it down, and it should work just fine after that. So we've got the tutorial, black bar top, black bar bottom. Okay, so there's a hint right there of how that cinematic is working where the black bars are coming in. So that's an obvious way to improve that UI scene. And if you want an obvious way to improve your internet security, check out today's video partner, NordVPN. Why would you need to secure your internet data anyway? Well, there are attackers out there that are constantly looking to steal your sensitive information. One of the ways that the attackers can do this is by using a man-in-the-middle attack, which is commonly done by setting up a fake Wi-Fi hotspot in a public place to lure people into connecting to it. Attackers can read and potentially alter all of the data flowing through that fake hotspot, which may include your sensitive information like credit card numbers and passwords. NordVPN establishes a secure encrypted tunnel between their servers and your device, such that even if an attacker were to try to target you, they'd be unable to read the data. You can have this security and peace of mind by visiting nordvpn.com/firebelly. I've personally been a NordVPN subscriber for many years at this point. I love the simplicity of the desktop app, and above all else, I love the peace of mind it gives me when I'm doing sensitive things like banking. If you use my link nordvpn.com/firebelly, you'll get 4 extra months of NordVPN. This is the best deal that NordVPN is offering anywhere right now, and it's only available from creators like myself. You also get a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if for whatever reason you're not satisfied with the product, you can get your money back within 30 days of your sign-up date. Again, you can get 4 extra months of NordVPN by visiting my link, nordvpn.com/firebelly. The link is in the description and the pinned comment below. Thanks to NordVPN for partnering with me on this video, and let's get back into the code review. Let's keep looking through this game scene here. So this intro cutscene, okay, so here we go. This is how that initial cutscene is working. We've got the camera 3D. So this looks very simple, actually. The camera 3D here, open fridge. Let's see if we just pan this. Okay, so my window is not very big here. So we've got the open fridge here, and that also causes a fade in. Where's that fade in coming from? Oh, it's just modifying the world environment here. Oh, I see. So the world environment's brightness property is being changed. So environment adjustment brightness. So that's being changed from 0.1 to 1.0. That is the open fridge animation. And then it's going pan to stove. So this camera here, if we can see it, this camera is typically oriented behind the egg. But as we move forward, you can see that that camera is moving. Is there two cameras? I think there's just one camera. So what I might do for a cutscene is, I'm not going to go super deep into this, but if I needed a camera that needed to move separate from the egg here, I might create a second camera as a cutscene camera. And if I wanted to start a cutscene, I would just place that camera at the player's current camera position. So you have one camera that is for the player and one camera that's for the cutscene. You disable the cutscene camera until you need it. When you want to trigger the cutscene, you move the cutscene camera to the exact position and orientation that the player's camera currently is. Then you enable that camera, disable the player camera, and then you can start your animation from that point. I think that might make things just a little bit cleaner because then you don't have to manage different states within the same camera, right? You don't have to change a camera that is typically oriented around the player in order to make it work for all the cutscenes in your game. I would just create a separate camera, maybe even for each cutscene, but certainly separate the camera from the player. That might make the logic a little bit more easy to follow. For this small of a game, I think that this is totally fine. And this camera here, we can see the camera preview over on the right-hand side here. That's just zooming into the stove exactly like that. The light turns on. What is actually causing the light to turn on? Burner light flickering. Okay, so it's turning on the flickering here. Very cool. So yeah, these lights are just being enabled. The fire sound effects are being played. So everything is being controlled with the animation player. We're not seeing the black bars move. That might be related to the fact that they're now nested inside of this UI. So you may have to coordinate that a little bit better. You might want to trigger a separate animation in the UI for the black bars. But otherwise, I think this scene is pretty straightforward. We could take a look at these pickups if we want. I'm guessing these are just going to be simple area collisions. Yeah, there's a pickup detection area with a collision shape 3D, and we have an animation player here for the spinning. Very simple. I think that's a typical pickup implementation. So a couple of questions. We want to figure out how exactly the player is working, and then also how the environmental objects like the oven mitts are cushioning the fall. Let's go ahead and open up that player script and we'll take a look at what's going on in here. This is a rigid body 3D, so we're probably going to be moving this with impulses with WASD and whatnot. Okay, so here's an immediate thing that I'm seeing here. This call deferred with the string no longer needs to be done. You can do spawn fragmented egg.call deferred like this so that you can use a symbol instead of a string. I'm also noticing that there are semicolons at the end of each of these lines. That's not something you typically see in GDScript. A lot of people leave the semicolons off. I would say most people do. It's not a problem per se, because obviously it doesn't break the script at all. Typically, yeah, those semicolons are not included in GDScript. So yeah, we've got the call deferred there. Set shader parameter for the base texture. Oh, interesting. Okay. Maybe that's related to the cracking decal. I'm not sure. We have a self-destruct button. I didn't know there was a self-destruct button. Physics process, here we go. Okay, so we've got a handle input method here. If is action pressed forward, move forward. If is action pressed backwards, left. Okay, so this is just setting up the vectors. So the forward vector in 3D space is obviously going to change based on your orientation. So what's happening here is if you want to move left or right, it has to be in relation to the current forward vector, and that's what these cross product operations are doing. And then we also have a strafe multiplier here, which presumably just changes, yeah, it's the speed multiplier for left-right movement. Cool. And then we've got an impulse being applied for jumping. Now, what is this move doing? This move here, what this is doing is this is applying torque. Oh, interesting. It's applying torque along a direction at a path and rate. So I guess this is how you would move balls. Again, I don't know much about 3D, especially movement in 3D space, but it seems to be pretty straightforward. It's just using a physics object and then applying forces or torques in accordance with the inputs to move the character. Now let's figure out how this is actually handling damage. Oh, here we go. On hit ground. Where is this being connected? Let's take a look. Body entered, connect, on hit ground. So it looks like the player body, if we go ahead and open up the player here, and this would have been a good thing to do here as well. Let's go to the 3D tab. So here's our player. Oh, we actually do have a a camera on the player. So maybe what I was suggesting is already the case. So when I mentioned there should be two separate cameras previously, it looks like that is indeed the case. So that's great. We've got our egg mesh, collision shape 3D. So this ball here, it's called ball instead of egg. That's funny. This ball here, it is on the player layer and it looks for environment, interactables, and environment no camera. I don't know what the environment no camera is, but this environment tag or this environment layer here is probably what the floor layer is. So let's just select one of these floors and let's look for the collision layer. Yeah, so it's just on the environment layer. Okay, so the player is detecting when the environment enters the body area, essentially. So in this on hit ground here, check to see if we did indeed hit the ground, not some other object. So we're doing a static body 3D check here. This delta V it's measuring the change in the velocity's magnitude. So we've got this last frame velocity and the current linear velocity. This is just a minor nitpick. This is not necessary because I think, maybe I'm mistaken about this, but length should always return a positive number. So I'm pretty sure you don't need these absolutes here. That's just a minor nitpick. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe the length is negative for some reason, but I'm pretty sure that length should always be positive. Collision layer names are inaccessible. Magic number 1 and 3 is for environment objects floor. Okay, so when you're trying to do collision layer checks in code, one thing that can be useful is using bit shifting. So what you can do is if you look at the collision layers, you've got these bit selections here. So this is bit 0, this is bit 1, this is bit 2. So the way that collisions work in Godot, at least these layers and masks, is they use bit masking. So you can essentially set the individual bits of a 32-bit integer, and those can represent which masks are on and off. But the way that binary works is that depending on whether a bit is set to 0 or 1, it kind of determines what the decimal value of the integer is. So when you hover over this and it says bit 2 value 4, that means that when bit 2 is set, the integer value is going to be 4. Now, the interesting thing is that if I were to set, let's say, bit 1 and bit 0, the value would be 3 because it would add 1 and 2 because bits 0 and bits 1 are on, which in binary translates to a decimal number of 3, right? So when you're trying to do this stuff in code, what you can do is you can actually use the bit value and convert the bit number into a decimal number for the purpose of checking, right? So in body collision layer not in 1, 3 here, what I could do is I could do this. So if body collision layer not in 1 shifted 0, and then 1 shifted, let's see, 2. So what am I doing here? I'm taking 1 and I'm bit shifting it over, meaning that I'm taking that bit and I'm shifting it over inside of the, you can imagine like an array of bits, I'm shifting it over in terms of its index in the position. And what that does is that creates an easy integer value for you. If I take 1 and bit shift it over 0, I'm essentially saying take 1 and place it at bit 0. And that essentially translates to a value of 1. It sets the first bit. For 1 shifted over 2, I'm essentially saying turn on the bit at position 2. So in this mask here, this 3, this is kind of confusing, but number 3 here corresponds to bit 2. So I'm shifting this over 2 positions to place it at bit 2. And that's going to translate to a value of 4. So this is what I do in my code anytime that I need to actually check the value of the collision layer is I will first bit shift 1 over by the bit index essentially that I'm trying to check. And then that allows me to more easily rationalize what's going on. Now, the problem here is I'm not actually sure that this collision layer is doing what the developer wants, at least with the value of 3. So previously this was saying if collision layer not in 1 or 3. Now this 3 value is only ever going to be set if the layer is set to 2 and 1. So 3 is the cumulative value of the bits 0 and 1 being set. So I'm not entirely sure that's what the developer wanted. I'm thinking that maybe the developer wanted the interactables value, which would have been, again, this would have been 1 bit shifted over to position 2. So that might actually be a bug. That second 3 value may not actually be doing what the developer is expecting it to do, but this is a good way to get a little bit more clarity out of your magic numbers. In any case, it looks like this delta V, it's checking how fast the player has accelerated since the last frame's velocity. And based on that delta V, it is either impacting soft or it's shattering instantly. I'm not sure. So I don't know much about 3D physics and all that stuff. I'm not sure if checking the change in the last frame's velocity is the appropriate way to do it. It almost seems to me like it would be better just to check the absolute speed rather than the change in speed, because if an egg is moving at 1,000 miles per hour, but it's not accelerating, it's still going to shatter instantly when it hits something, right? So just by that logic alone, I might just try to find some speed thresholds that are good for the egg to instantly shatter and use those thresholds instead of the change in velocity over time. Now, this does work if assuming that you don't have like a terminal velocity, because then the egg is just going to continue to accelerate faster and faster. So I think it's probably okay, but I probably personally would just decide some speed thresholds and do those checks instead. Now we're checking for the crack threshold here, and it looks like we have some kind of health value so that after a certain number of cracks, it will shatter. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so on the shatter egg, this does pretty much what you'd expect it to do. It applies a bunch of visibility changes, but we also have this draw splat. So we've got a splat scene. Where's our splat scene? Splat scene decal compatibility. Interesting. So where is that? Is that at the root level here? Or I wonder where the splat scene is actually being set. Let's see, splat scene. So just a quick comment on this. This draw splat here, this makes me a little bit uneasy because this assumes that the splat scene has already been created. This is the kind of situation that you can end up with a very easily like null reference error, right? Because you're calling draw splat anywhere where this function is called, and you have to have knowledge of whether the splat scene exists or not to avoid the null reference error. I would almost try to, I got to study the code a little bit more, but I would almost try to make the draw splat all inclusive. It should spawn or create the splat scene and then do whatever drawing or changes to the splat scene it needs to do. So spawn fragmented egg here, this is where the splat scene is being created. So let's take a look at where spawn fragmented egg is happening. Spawn fragmented egg is being called in the player controller. This is the method that I changed to call deferred here. So if we go back, spawn fragmented egg. Okay, so it's setting up the splat scene already, essentially. And this is a hacky solution to precompile decal shaders since the splat first spawn causes lag. Okay, interesting. So I can see why these are separated now. I still don't see a reason why you need to hold on to a long-lived reference of the splat scene. So this is a problem with Godot, is the pre-compilation of shaders. As of the current version of Godot 4.4.1, anytime a new shader is introduced into the scene such that it's visible, if that shader has not been compiled, Godot needs to compile it, and that creates runtime lag. Now, the way that I've solved this in my game Gunforged, for instance, is I actually created a list of all of the scenes in the game that have shaders. Now, the tricky thing about Godot is you need to realize that there's a lot of things that are shaders that don't appear to be shaders. For example, every particle process material is a shader under the hood. Godot converts that to a shader. So if you have a particle system in your game, that is a shader, unless you're using CPU particles, I think. But if you're using the GPU particles, that's a shader. So that means that anytime that particle gets introduced into your game for the first time, there's going to be a hitch when Godot compiles that particle shader. So in Gunforged, I loaded up all my scenes that have particles and other materials, and I just spawn instances of those scenes behind a black screen at runtime so that all of the hitching gets done up front. But after you compile those shaders, you don't need to keep references to those scenes or materials around. You can free them. Godot will know that those materials have already been compiled or those shaders have already been compiled. And so the next time you instantiate it, it's not going to present a problem. So in here, in this spawn fragmented egg, this is being done to precompile the shader, which is understandable, but you don't need to hold on to a long-lived reference here. I'm pretty sure that what you can do is you can do this splat.instantiate just normally. So I could say var splat scene here is equal to splat.instantiate. And then I can just do the same thing here, var splat scene equals splat.instantiate. And then what I can do is I can just get rid of this long-lived reference here. I don't need this. And so now I'm just going to run the game and make sure I didn't break anything, but that should be exactly the same. So let's go ahead and get through this. The other thing I could recommend too is you could add an option to skip that initial cutscene. Okay, I broke the splat scene. Okay, so I broke the splat scene. Why did I break it? Draw splat is inside tree. Oh, I forgot to add this to the tree. Oops. A very classic error. Get parent.add child splat scene. So we'll just run that really quick. Okay, it's working fine. And yeah, you don't need to hold on to a reference of that splat scene if you're just trying to pre-compile it so there's no stutters. Okay, so I think the egg is generally looking pretty good. The developer was concerned about the player script maybe being a little bit too big, but I actually think this is a very reasonable size. So in software engineering, there's a principle known as SOLID, or it's a set of principles, one of which is the single responsibility principle, which is the idea that your script, your class, should do one thing. Now, the meaning of what one thing is debatable, but for the player script, the one thing is it provides the controls that are necessary to move the player around. It provides the functionality that is required for the player, like shattering and movement and all that stuff. So I would say that this script, generally speaking, is following the single responsibility principle. Now, it's doing things like spawning the splat scene and it's moving around. Again, the meaning of what one thing is kind of debatable, because one thing could be one line of code, but obviously that's not helpful, right? So one thing is more of like a conceptual one thing, like is the player just concerned with itself, or are there other elements of the gameplay systems reaching into the player, or is the player intertangled with the other game systems in a way that's not very modular? I don't really see that in this script, so I would say that this script is perfectly acceptable. I read through the script, I understand it, I know what's going on, it's not hard to follow at all, so I would say that that's great. Now, generally speaking, I'm against comments, and the reason is because comments and code are a separate source of truth, right? Your code is doing one thing and your comments are saying another thing. Now, when you first write the comment is going to be aligned with what the code is doing. The problem though is that as you change the code, as you change systems, if you neglect to update the comments, which is very easy to do because they're not part of the program's running logic, it's very easy for comments to become out of date or to lose the context that they originally had, such that they become misleading. So you could actually end up in a situation where a comment says one thing, but the code says another. And a developer coming into the code base might look at that and say, wait, now I'm confused. Is the comment the source of truth, or is the code the source of truth? Because there's one view, which is that if I come in to a comment that is describing something that's not happening in the function, I may say, oh, well, that's a bug, right? But on the flip side, it could be the case that no, the code is working correctly, but the comment is out of date. So the thing is, like, comments, I think they have a big potential to add confusion rather than adding clarity. And so, I think that these comments here with respect to pre-compiling are helpful, particularly as a developer coming fresh to this project, because otherwise I wouldn't have known why this was happening, right? But there are comments like this, which I think are completely unnecessary. Apply the next available supplied crack texture to indicate damage. I think that you can pretty much intuit that from reading this block here. So I would almost just delete that comment, because there's no, if your code is clean enough. So this is another reason why I don't like comments, is that it's easy to get away with making your code unclear if you can just explain it away with a comment, when the opposite should be true. You should be striving to make your code as clear to read as possible, such that you don't even need comments. That's just a much better way, in my opinion, of writing code, generally speaking. That's kind of why I typically don't like comments, because comments allow you to explain away code that isn't written as clearly as it should be, but also they have the potential to become out of date and kind of confusing what the source of truth is. Something like this comment here, check to see if we did indeed hit the ground. I think that's pretty clear from this line here. We're checking, hey, if we're not hitting a static body 3D, we don't care. So again, that doesn't really need to be there. Reset camera, this is a helper function to reset camera orientation. If you really need it to be clear, I would just maybe call this reset camera orientation. Like, you can make your function names longer or more descriptive if you need to, but I don't even know if that's necessary. I think reset camera with no comment is perfectly fine. This same deal, helper function to calculate FOV based on current speed limitation. Again, if you want to mention speed limitation, you could just do calculate FOV based on speed, right? Like you can make your function names more descriptive if you need them to be, rather than adding a comment. But anyway, I think we've looked at the player script enough. Let's take a look at some of the environment objects and see exactly how the cushioning is working. And actually that might be in the player script here. Let's take a look at, I believe we have a waffle here. So we've got the waffle. Let's take a look at this. This is a collision shape 3D. Is this a static body 3D? Yeah, so this is a static body 3D with the interactable layer here. And it doesn't even have a script. So the cushioning when the player lands on a waffle must already be handled in the player script here. Oh, I see. So this is the line of code that I'm looking at here. So what this is essentially saying is if the body that we're colliding with is not in, this used to be 1 and 3. Again, I don't really know what this second value is because again, that value is only going to be 3 if inside of the collision here, bits 0 and 1 are set, which doesn't make sense because the bit 1 here is the player layer. So I don't really know. I think this is trying to set it to the interactables layer. I'm not exactly sure. But basically, if the collision layer is not in the environment layer, then we're not going to handle any of the damage. So what's essentially happening is the egg is hitting the waffle or other objects, which are inside of the interactables layer. And because the player has that script there, that code there, checking if we're hitting environment, it's not doing any damage. Now, what's interesting is I actually don't think you need this second argument. I honestly do think, and to the developer, I don't know, maybe you have a good reason for that, but I think the second argument here was not necessary. If you want to be really safe here, what you can do is you can use a bitwise AND here. So we could do if body.collision layer and then 1 shifted over 0, and we'll put that in parentheses as well. If that is equal to 0, we're essentially saying, okay, the body that we collided with is not in the environment layer, period. Because the previous check was saying if the body collision layer is only in the environment layer. But we may have static body 2Ds that are in the environment and also in a different collision layer for whatever reason. But if you just want to check, is it in the environment layer, then you can do something like this, where you use a bitwise AND. Again, I would recommend looking up the bitwise operators to get a good handle on what's going on here. But with that in place, we're essentially saying if the body we're colliding with is not in the environment layer, then we're just going to not break the egg. So I'm going to make sure that that still works. So let me roll down here and see if I die. Yep, that works just fine. And then let's try the soft landing as well. And the soft landing appears to work just fine. And it looks like I actually didn't break on that countertop. So I may have broken something here, but let's see. No, it looks like the collision is working. So I'm pretty sure it's working. I may have inadvertently broken a small thing here or there because I'm not totally intimately familiar with the code. But again, I'm just trying to give you an overview of how I'm thinking about this. So I'm going to show you one more thing, which I think would be really helpful, which is that, every time you start the game right now, there is the cutscene, right? Which can be very cumbersome for testing. So we probably want to enable some kind of testing feature that we can use to skip the cutscene. Now, I don't know exactly how the cutscene is being triggered here. It looks like the intro cutscene, let's see. We got to figure out how the intro cutscene is being operated. Okay, here we go. Signal bus game started. If not globals has played cutscene, open fridge. If globals is game started, on game started. Okay, one way that we can skip the cutscene here, I'm actually not sure exactly what this logic is doing here because we've got some globals is game started here. If we haven't played the cutscene, we're playing the open fridge panda stove. Okay, I see what's happening. So on game started is being called here based on this is game started here. So I may not do this in the best way, but I just want to give you an overview of how I would skip this cutscene. So what you can do, so you can open up your project settings here and you can actually create your own settings. So if I go to advanced settings here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this inside of this text area here, game/debug/skip_cutscene, like so. And then you can select the type of that variable essentially, or that project setting. I'm going to leave it at bool here and I click add. And what that does is that creates a new section here. So game debug. So I've got my own custom project settings section based on, the paths delineated by the / here. And then now I can turn on the skip cutscene there and close that. And I can read that custom setting now. So I'm just going to try this. I'm going to try to make this work. I may not get it to work, but globals is game started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. If project settings dot get setting game /debug /skip cutscene. So we'll just go ahead and put that in there. I'm going to say globals dot is game started equals true. Now, the other thing that you would do, since this is a debug setting, is I would also add os.is debug build. So if we're in a debug build and the project setting for skip cutscene is on, then we can set globals is game started to true. Let's see if that actually skips the cutscene or not. It may not, but let's see. Yeah, it didn't appear to skip the cutscene. So I would have to look a little bit more closely into how that logical flow is actually working. But generally speaking, this is the approach that you would take to skip the cutscene. So wherever the cutscene logic is being triggered, which I don't have time to get into very deeply here, you want to just gate that cutscene with some kind of check like this. Skip the cutscene if the game debug skip cutscene is enabled. Otherwise, run the cutscene as normal. That's it for this code review. Thanks again to today's video partner, NordVPN. Use the link in the description or in the pinned comment to get 4 bonus months of NordVPN. And thank you again to the developer Fresh4. Again, the itch.io page for this game is linked in the description and the pinned comment. So please check out the developer's game, The Great Eggscape. Thank you again for submitting it. I think it made a great code review episode. If you are watching this and you want to submit your project for a potential code review, use the Google Form submission link in the description or the pinned comment to submit your game. Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to support my work, you can purchase one of my courses. You can purchase my game Gunforged on Steam, and you can sign up for my email list at firebelly.com. All the ways that you can support me are linked in the description below.